The thunder of hooves echoed through the California foothills as Morgan Crawford's horse stumbled on the rocky trail, sending him lurching forward in the saddle. It was September 1878, and he had been tracking a lost calf for the better part of 3 hours when the sound reached his ears. So faint, he almost missed it over the whisper of wind through the pines. A voice, soft and melodic, was singing an old hymn somewhere up in these forsaken hills above Yuba City. Morgan pulled his mare to a halt, his weather-beaten face turning toward the sound with curiosity etched into every line. Nobody lived up here, not for miles around, and yet there was no mistaking it. Someone was singing. He guided his horse off the trail, following the voice through a dense thicket of manzanita and oak. The terrain grew rougher with each step, and Morgan found himself wondering what kind of fool would make their home in such isolation. When he finally broke through the brush into a small clearing, he stopped cold. Before him stood a ramshackle cabin, its walls patched with mismatched boards and its roof sagging dangerously to one side. Smoke curled from a crooked chimney, and there, sitting on a weathered stump near a vegetable garden that was more weeds than crops, was a young woman with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders in waves. She was still singing, her hands busy shelling peas into a wooden bowl balanced on her lap. Morgan dismounted quietly, not wanting to startle her, but as he approached, he realized something was wrong with the way she moved. Her head tilted at odd angles, as though she were listening for something, and her eyes, though open and a striking shade of green, seemed to focus on nothing at all. When he was close enough to speak, he cleared his throat gently. The woman gasped and jerked to her feet, sending peas scattering across the dirt. The bowl clattered to the ground as she turned in his direction, her hands outstretched defensively. "Who is there?" Her voice held an edge of fear that made Morgan's chest tighten with an unfamiliar protectiveness. "Name is Morgan Crawford, miss. I did not mean to frighten you. I was tracking a calf and heard your singing." He kept his voice low and steady the way he would with a skittish horse. "Are you all right up here? This is rough country to be living alone." Her posture relaxed slightly, though her hands remained raised between them. "I manage well enough, Mr. Crawford. I have been here for near on 2 years now." She paused, then added with a touch of pride, "My name is Deanna Bailey." Morgan took a careful step closer, studying her face in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the trees. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with delicate features that would have been considered beautiful in any setting, let alone this isolated hillside. But it was her eyes that held his attention. They were clear and bright, but they did not track his movement, did not focus on his face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Miss Bailey, forgive my asking, but can you see me at all?" Her chin lifted in a gesture of defiance that he would come to know well in the weeks ahead. "I cannot see anything, Mr. Crawford. I have been blind since I was 17 years old. A fever took my sight, but it left me everything else I need to survive." The words were brave, but Morgan heard the loneliness beneath them, the weight of years spent in darkness with no human company. He looked around the clearing again, this time seeing it through new eyes. The garden was struggling because she could not see the weeds choking out her vegetables. The cabin leaned because she could not see which boards needed replacing. The whole place spoke of someone doing their best against impossible odds, and something in Morgan's heart shifted irrevocably in that moment. How do you get supplies? How do you manage when winter comes? The questions tumbled out before he could stop them. Diana's shoulders stiffened. "I have chickens for eggs, and I preserve what I can from the garden. There is a stream nearby for water. I get by, Mr. Crawford. I do not need pity or charity." "I was not offering either, miss." Morgan removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair as he considered his next words carefully. "But I am offering something else, if you will hear me out." She stood silent, waiting, her face turned slightly away from him as though she could not bear to have those unseeing eyes pointed in his direction. Morgan had never been good with words, had spent most of his 31 years working with animals and land rather than people, but something about this woman made him want to try. "Let me be your eyes," he said simply. "Let me come up here regular-like, help you with the things that need seeing to. I am not asking for anything in return, Miss Bailey. I am just a cowboy who happens to think nobody should have to live like this when there is help to be had." Diana was quiet for so long that Morgan thought she might send him away. Her hands had lowered to her sides, and she was worrying her bottom lip between her teeth. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Morgan replied. "And because I suspect you have been alone up here long enough." The truth was more complicated than that, though Morgan did not fully understand it himself yet. There was something about Diana Bailey that called to something deep in his soul, something that recognized her strength and her stubbornness and her fierce independence. She was like a wild mustang that had never known a kind hand, beautiful and proud and utterly alone. Diana turned away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "I will not be beholden to anyone, Mr. Crawford. I left Yuba City because people there looked at me with pity. They treated me as though I were made of glass, as though blindness had stolen my mind along with my sight. I will not live that way." "Then do not," Morgan said, moving to stand beside her, careful not to touch her but close enough that she could feel his presence. "I will treat you as I would anyone else. You want to learn to fix your roof, I will teach you. You want help telling the weeds from the carrots, I will describe them until you can feel the difference yourself. But I am not leaving you up here alone, miss. My conscience would not allow it." She laughed then, a sound like water over stones, unexpected and lovely. "You are a stubborn man, Mr. Crawford. So I have been told, Miss Bailey." They stood together in the clearing as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western hills. Morgan could hear the chickens clucking in their coop behind the cabin, could smell the sharp scent of wood smoke and the earthier smell of Diana's struggling garden. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, until Diana finally turned to face him again. "If you are going to be coming around, you might as well make yourself useful today. That roof has been leaking something terrible when it rains, and I cannot for the life of me figure out where the holes are." Morgan felt a grin spread across his face, though she could not see it. "Yes, miss. I would be happy to take a look." That first afternoon set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Morgan returned to his ranch before dark, found the lost calf in a ravine on the western edge of his property, and spent the entire ride back thinking about Diana Bailey and her lonely hillside home. The next morning, he told his foreman he would be taking time each day to help a neighbor, ignoring the curious looks from his ranch hands. By noon, he was back in the hills with a pack horse loaded with supplies. Diana heard him coming this time and was waiting in her doorway when he arrived. "You came back," said I would, did I not? Morgan began unloading tools and supplies, describing each item as he set it down. "Brought some tar paper for your roof, extra nails and some seeds for your garden. Also brought coffee and flour and a few other things I figured you might need." "Mr. Crawford, I told you I do not want charity." "And I told you I would teach you, not do it for you," Morgan replied evenly. "But you cannot plant seeds you do not have, and you cannot fix a roof without materials. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back in eggs or whatever else you have once your garden is producing properly." He could see her warring with pride and practicality, her jaw set in a stubborn line that he was beginning to find endearing. Finally, she nodded once, sharply. "Alone, then." "I will pay you back every bit of it." "Never doubted it for a moment, miss." They spent that day working on the roof. Morgan climbed up and described every weak spot, every missing shingle, every place where rain would seep through. Deanna stood below, handing him tools and materials as he called for them, learning the layout of the roof through his words. He found himself talking more than he had in years, describing not just the roof but the view from up there, the way the hills rolled away toward Yuba City in the distance, the hawks circling overhead, the color of the sky as afternoon gave way to evening. "What does the sky look like now?" Deanna asked at one point, her face turned upward as though she could feel the light on her skin. Morgan paused in his work, hammer in hand, and really looked at the sky for the first time in longer than he could remember. "It is turning gold at the edges where the sun is getting low. The blue is deeper now, more like the color of your dress than the pale wash it was at midday. There are a few clouds moving in from the west, thin and stretched out like pulled cotton. They are catching the light, turning pink and orange on their undersides." "That sounds beautiful," Deanna said softly. "I used to love watching the sunset. Sometimes I dream about colors, even though I cannot remember exactly what they look like anymore." Something in Morgan's chest squeezed tight at those words. He climbed down from the roof and stood beside her, both of them facing west. "The sun is sitting right on the ridge now, big and orange as a pumpkin. It is so bright you cannot look straight at it. The light is making everything glow, turning the pine trees black against all that color. There is a breeze picking up, cooling things off after the heat of the day." Deanna closed her eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you, Morgan." It was the first time she had used his given name, and he found he liked the sound of it in her voice. "You are welcome, Deanna." As the days turned into weeks, Morgan found excuses to spend more and more time on the hillside. He repaired Diana's cabin, teaching her to recognize sound differences between solid boards and rotten ones. He worked with her in the garden, helping her create a system of string markers so she could tell her rows apart, describing each plant until she could identify them by touch and smell. He fixed her chicken coop and showed her how to feel for eggs without startling the hens. Through it all they talked. Morgan learned that Deanna had come to California with her family when she was 15, that her parents and younger brother had died of cholera 2 years after she lost her sight, leaving her with nothing but the small inheritance that had bought this land and cabin. She had chosen isolation over pity, independence over the charity of distant relatives who had wanted to lock her away in an institution for the blind. Diana learned that Morgan had built his ranch from nothing, starting as a cowhand at 16 and saving every penny until he could buy his own land. He had never married, never found a woman who understood his need for the open range and the quiet of his own thoughts. He was a man of few words with most people, but with Deanna, the words came easily. "Tell me about your ranch," Deanna said one afternoon as they sat on her newly repaired porch, shelling beans together. She had become adept at the task, her fingers quick and sure in the bowl. Morgan leaned back against the cabin wall, watching the way sunlight caught in her dark hair. "It is nothing fancy, just about 300 acres of grazing land with a creek running through the middle. I have got about 40 head of cattle right now, few horses. The ranch house is small, 2 rooms and a loft, but it suits me fine. My foreman Jack and the other hands live in the bunkhouse down by the barn. It sounds peaceful." "It is," Morgan agreed, "but it has been feeling lonelier than usual lately." He had not meant to say that last part out loud, and he felt heat creep up his neck. Diana's hands stilled in the bowl. "Morgan, Why do you really keep coming back here? I know it is not just to fix my roof or tend my garden. You could have done that in a few days and been done with it." He took a long breath, trying to find the right words. "At first, I came because it seemed like the right thing to do. But then I kept coming because I wanted to see you. I wanted to hear you laugh. I wanted to talk to you about everything and nothing. Deanna, these past weeks have been the best I have had in longer than I can remember." She turned her face toward him, and for a moment, he could almost believe she was looking at him, really seeing him. "I have been alone for so long that I forgot what it felt like to have someone care whether I was all right or not. You have given me more than help with my cabin and garden, Morgan. You have given me companionship, friendship. You have treated me like a person, not like a problem to be solved or a burden to be endured." Morgan reached out slowly, giving her time to hear the movement, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were calloused from work, strong despite their delicacy. "You could never be a burden, Deanna." She did not pull away from his touch. Instead, her fingers curled around his, and Morgan felt that small gesture all the way to his bones. They sat like that as the afternoon faded, hands joined, neither of them speaking, both of them feeling the shift between them like the change of seasons. But life had a way of testing even the most fragile of new beginnings. The trouble started on a crisp October morning when Morgan arrived at Deanna's cabin to find her standing in the clearing, her whole body tense with barely contained fear. She held a heavy stick in both hands, and her head was moving in quick jerks as she tracked sounds he could not yet hear. "Deanna, what is wrong?" She sagged with relief at his voice. "Morgan, thank God. There is something out there, something big. I heard it last night circling the cabin. The chickens have been going mad all morning, and I can hear it moving through the brush. I think it might be a bear." Morgan's hand went automatically to the rifle on his saddle. Fall was when bears were most active, fattening up before winter, and a hungry bear could do serious damage. "Get inside the cabin and bar the door. I will handle this. Morgan, be careful." "Always am," he said, though his heart was hammering as he loaded his rifle and moved toward the tree line where he could hear branches snapping. He did not relish the idea of facing down a bear, but he would do whatever it took to keep Deanna safe. The animal that emerged from the trees was not a bear but a massive mountain lion, lean and hungry looking, its tawny coat marked with scars from previous fights. It fixed Morgan with pale yellow eyes, its tail lashing as it assessed him as either threat or prey. Morgan raised his rifle slowly, knowing that mountain lions could cover incredible distances in a single leap. His mouth had gone dry, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Easy there," he said quietly, his voice steady even though his hands wanted to shake. "You do not want to do this. There is nothing for you here." The mountain lion crouched, muscles bunching beneath its scarred hide, and Morgan knew he had only seconds before it would spring. His finger tightened on the trigger just as a shot rang out from behind him. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from the mountain lion's paw, and the big cat yowled and bounded back into the underbrush, crashing through the forest in its haste to escape. Morgan spun around to find Deanna standing in the doorway of the cabin, an old shotgun braced against her shoulder, pointing toward where the mountain lion had been. Her face was pale but determined, and her hands were rock steady on the weapon. "Did I hit it?" she asked, her voice remarkably calm. Morgan lowered his rifle and walked back to her, gently taking the shotgun from her hands. "No, but you scared it off, which is just as good. Deanna, how in the hell did you know where to aim?" She gave him a shaky smile. "I heard its breathing, heard the way the sound changed when it moved. I knew approximately where it would be. I could not let it hurt you, Morgan. I just pointed and prayed." He set both weapons aside and pulled her into his arms without thinking. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest as the adrenaline began to wear off and the shaking started. Morgan held her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, and felt something fundamental click into place in his heart. "You could have been killed," he murmured into her hair. "That thing could have come after you." "So could you have been killed?" Deanna countered, her words muffled against his shirt. "I could not just hide inside and wait to see if you would be all right. I had to do something." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms in the doorway of the cabin. When Deanna finally pulled back, her face was flushed and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Morgan, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you," she said in a rush, as though the words had been building pressure inside her and had finally burst free. "I know it is foolish and complicated and probably impossible, but I cannot help it. You have become the best part of my days, and when you are not here, all I can think about is when you will come back. If that frightens you or makes you uncomfortable, please just tell me now so I can protect what is left of my heart." Morgan cupped her face in his hands, tilting it up toward his. "Deanna Bailey, I have been in love with you since the day I found you singing in this clearing. I just did not know how to tell you. I did not know if a woman like you could ever want a man like me." "A woman like me," Deanna repeated, her brow furrowing. "Strong, brave, beautiful, independent. Deanna, you are remarkable. Your blindness is not what defines you. Your courage does, your kindness does, your determination to build a life on your own terms does. I have met a lot of people in my life, and I have never met anyone quite like you." Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, and Morgan wiped them away with his thumbs. "Then why would you think I would not want you? Morgan, you have been patient and kind and respectful. You have never made me feel less than whole. You have taught me things and learned from me in return. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. You make me feel alive in a way I have not felt since I lost my sight." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, a question and a promise all at once. Deanna's hands came up to rest on his chest, and she kissed him back with a sweetness that made his knees weak. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, and Morgan rested his forehead against hers. "Come down off this mountain, Deanna. Come live at the ranch with me. Not as my guest or my charity case, but as my partner, my equal, the woman I love. Marry me." Deanna laughed, the sound somewhere between joy and disbelief. "Morgan Crawford, that is the least romantic proposal I could have imagined, and I cannot see your face, but I can hear your heart racing, and I know you mean every word." She kissed him again, quick and fierce. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will come to your ranch. Yes to all of it as long as we face it together." The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Morgan brought Deanna down to the ranch, introducing her to his foreman Jack, a grizzled man in his 50s who took one look at the way Morgan hovered around Deanna and gave his boss a knowing grin. The ranch hands were curious but respectful, and Deanna surprised them all by learning the layout of the ranch house in a matter of days. Morgan watched with a mixture of pride and amazement as Deanna made the ranch house her own. She asked him to describe the placement of every piece of furniture, every window, every door, until she could navigate the space with confidence. She learned to cook on the wood stove by temperature and smell, producing meals that had the ranch hands singing her praises. She tended a new garden near the house, using the same system of string markers that had worked on the hillside, but the adjustment was not without its challenges. Deanna struggled with the sounds of the ranch, the constant activity of men and animals that was so different from her quiet hillside. Morgan found himself torn between his duties running the ranch and his desire to be with Deanna every moment, to smooth every difficulty from her path. They had their first real argument on a gray November afternoon when Morgan insisted on accompanying her to the chicken coop for the third time that day. "Morgan, I can gather eggs by myself. I have been doing it for 2 years." "I know that, but there are ranch hands moving equipment around, and I do not want you to trip over something." Deanna set the egg basket down with a thump that cracked at least one egg. "So you are going to follow me around for the rest of our lives, making sure I do not trip over things? Is that how this is going to work?" "That is not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Deanna's voice had risen, and Morgan could see tears of frustration in her eyes. "I thought you understood, Morgan. I thought you saw me as capable, as strong. But you have been treating me like glass ever since we came to the ranch. I cannot live like that. I will not." The words hit Morgan like a punch to the gut because he knew they were true. He had been hovering, had been trying to protect her from every possible harm, and in doing so, he had been doing exactly what Diana had fled Yuba City to escape. He had been taking away her independence in the name of love. "You are right," he said quietly. "I am sorry, Diana. I have been so afraid of something happening to you that I forgot you survived just fine before I came along. You do not need me to be your keeper. You just need me to be your partner." Diana's expression softened. She reached out and Morgan took her hand, guiding it to his face. Her fingers traced his features, learning the shape of his remorse. "I know you are scared, Morgan. I am scared too, but we have to trust each other. You have to trust that I will ask for help when I need it, and I have to trust that you will give me space to figure things out on my own when I do not." "Can we start over?" Morgan asked, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "We can start again," Deanna corrected with a small smile. "Not over, because I would not trade what we have already built together for anything. But we can learn and adjust and find our way forward." They were married in Yuba City on a cold December morning with Jack standing up as best man and the local preacher's wife serving as witness. Deanna wore a simple dress of dove-gray wool that Morgan had described to her in painstaking detail, from the pearl buttons down the front to the lace at the collar and cuffs. Morgan wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed by Deanna's careful hands. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Morgan kissed his bride with a tenderness that made the preacher's wife dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the bedroom that Morgan had spent the previous week preparing. He had described every change to Deanna, from the new curtains at the window to the quilt on the bed that his mother had made years ago. Now, as they stood together in the lamplight, Morgan felt a nervousness he had not experienced since he was a green boy. "I can hear you thinking," Deanna said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Whatever you are worried about, stop. This is our beginning, Morgan. We will figure it out together." He reached for her slowly, giving her time to hear his movement, and began unbuttoning the pearl buttons of her dress. Deanna's hands found the buttons of his shirt, and together, they undressed each other with a combination of tenderness and awkward laughter when buttons stuck or fabric tangled. Morgan described every touch, every sensation, until Deanna was trembling in his arms and his own voice had gone rough with desire. Their coming together was gentle at first, then passionate, a conversation conducted in touches and sighs and whispered words of love. Morgan showed Deanna with his body what his words sometimes failed to express, and Deanna gave herself to him with a trust that humbled him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the lamplight, Deanna's head on Morgan's chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" Deanna asked sleepily. "That I am the luckiest man in California," Morgan replied. "That I found you when I was not even looking. That every day with you is a gift I do not deserve but will spend my life trying to earn." Deanna tilted her face up toward his, and he kissed her forehead. Morgan Crawford, you already earned it. You earned it the day you offered to be my eyes. You earned it with every kindness, every moment of patience, every time you treated me as your equal. I am the lucky one." The first year of their marriage brought changes and challenges that tested them both. Deanna became pregnant in the spring, and Morgan found himself once again fighting the urge to wrap her in cotton wool. But Deanna was having none of it. She continued working in her garden, cooking meals and managing the household even as her belly swelled with their child. She did concede to letting Morgan accompany her on longer walks and to avoiding the areas of the ranch where large animals were being worked, but she refused to be treated as an invalid. Their son was born on a hot August night in 1879, arriving with a lusty wail that announced his presence to the entire ranch. Deanna labored for 12 hours with the doctor from Yuba City and Morgan at her side. Morgan had never been so terrified in his life, listening to Deanna's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. But when the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in Deanna's arms, and Morgan watched her face transform with wonder as she explored their son's tiny features with her fingertips, he knew that every moment of fear had been worth it. "Tell me what he looks like," Deanna whispered, her voice hoarse from the effort of bringing their son into the world. Morgan sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, and looked at his son with eyes that burned with tears of joy. "He has dark hair, thick for a newborn. His eyes are blue, but the doctor says they might change. He has your nose, delicate and straight. His hands are perfect, 10 tiny fingers with nails so small they look like they were painted on. He is beautiful, Deanna. He is perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but now, looking at his son, Morgan knew there was only one name that felt right. "Daniel, after your father." Diana's eyes filled with tears. "Morgan, are you certain? I thought you wanted to name him after your father." "Your father would have been proud of you, Deanna. Proud of the life you have built, the strength you have shown. This little one should carry his name forward." Morgan gently touched his son's soft cheek. "Daniel Crawford, what do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Deanna said. And then she was crying in earnest, tears of joy and grief and exhaustion all mingled together. Morgan held them both, his wife and his newborn son, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. The years that followed were full and rich. Daniel grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's determination and his father's quiet strength. Deanna taught him his letters by touch, tracing them on his palm and on boards Morgan carved for them. Morgan taught him to ride and rope and care for the land. Together, they raised a child who saw his mother's blindness as simply one part of who she was, no more defining than the color of her hair or the sound of her voice. When Daniel was 3, Deanna gave birth to a daughter they named Daisy, a tiny thing with blonde hair that surprised them both. 2 years after that came twin boys, Matthew and Michael, who kept the entire household in a constant state of cheerful chaos. Deanna managed them all with a patience and grace that amazed everyone who knew her. She could tell her children apart by the sound of their footsteps, knew their moods by the tone of their voices, and ruled the Crawford household with a firm but loving hand. The ranch prospered under Morgan's care. He expanded the herd, built a larger barn, and hired more hands. But no matter how busy he became, he always made time to be Diana's eyes when she needed them. He described sunsets and cloud formations, told her about the way the grass changed color with the seasons, painted word pictures of their children's faces as they grew and changed. And Diana, for her part, taught Morgan to see the world in new ways, to appreciate the sound of rain on the roof, the texture of wood under his hands, the taste of fresh bread, the scent of pine on the wind. On a warm evening in the spring of 1885, Morgan and Deanna sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching as their children played in the yard. Daniel, now 5, was teaching 3-year-old Daisy to catch a ball, while the twins toddled around after the chickens, their laughter ringing through the air. The sun was setting behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Tell me about the sunset," Deanna said, leaning her head on Morgan's shoulder. It was a request she made often, and one Morgan never tired of fulfilling. "The whole sky is on fire tonight, every shade of gold and orange and pink you can imagine. There are clouds stretched across the horizon like ribbons, catching the light and glowing. The hills are dark against all that color, and the valley is starting to fill with shadows. Our children are running around in the last of the light, and I can see the joy on their faces. Daniel is so patient with his sister, and the twins are fearless, chasing anything that moves." Deanna smiled, her hand finding Morgan's and lacing their fingers together. "We have built a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Morgan agreed. "Deanna, do you ever regret it? Leaving your cabin on the hillside, tying yourself to a simple cowboy and his ranch?" She turned to face him, and even after all these years, Morgan still sometimes felt the jolt of emotion that came from looking into her unseeing eyes and knowing that she saw him more clearly than anyone else ever had. "Morgan Crawford, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. You gave me everything when you offered to be my eyes. You gave me partnership, respect, love, family, purpose. You gave me the courage to live fully again, to be more than just a blind woman surviving in the hills. You gave me a reason to hope." "You gave me just as much," Morgan said, his throat tight with emotion. "Before I found you, I was just going through the motions, building a ranch but not really building a life. You taught me what it means to really see, to pay attention, to find beauty and meaning in everything around me. You taught me what love is supposed to be, Deanna. Not possession or protection, but partnership. Not fixing someone, but walking beside them as they fix themselves." They sat in comfortable silence as the sunset faded and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Morgan described the constellations as they emerged, tracing patterns in the air that Deanna could not see but could imagine. The children eventually tired themselves out and were herded inside for baths and bed, their protests half-hearted because they were already yawning. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Morgan and Diana lay together in their bed. Diana's head rested on Morgan's chest, and he was stroking her hair, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years together. "Morgan." "Yes, love." "Do you remember that first day when you found me singing on the hillside?" "Every detail," Morgan confirmed. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, living up there all alone. I remember the way you lifted your chin when you told me you did not need pity. I remember the exact moment I knew I would never be the same." Diana pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I remember being terrified and trying so hard not to show it. I remember your voice, how gentle it was, how respectful. I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, I did not have to be alone anymore, but I was too scared to hope for it. And now I know that hope was not foolish. Now I know that love can find you even in the darkest places, even when you have stopped looking for it. Now I know that being vulnerable is not the same as being weak, and that accepting help is not the same as giving up your independence." Morgan pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, the familiar smell of home. "I love you, Deanna Crawford. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Morgan Crawford, my eyes, my heart, my partner in everything." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Daniel grew into a young man who shared his father's love of the land and his mother's compassion. He married a girl from Yuba City and brought her to live on the ranch, building a small house on the eastern edge of the property. Daisy became a teacher, working in the Yuba City school and boarding in town during the week. The twins went into business together, starting a freight company that hauled goods between the valley towns. Morgan and Deanna grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving a bit slower, but their love only deepening with time. Diana's garden became famous in the region, her vegetables and herbs sought after by everyone who knew her. She developed a reputation as someone who could heal minor ailments with her herbal remedies, and people came from miles around seeking her help. Morgan joked that she could see more with her hands, and her heart than most people could with perfect vision. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Morgan took Deanna back up to the hillside where he had first found her. The cabin was long abandoned, the roof partially collapsed, the garden overgrown. But they stood together in the clearing where their story had begun, and Morgan described how the place had changed, how the forest was reclaiming what had once been carved out of the wilderness. "It feels like another lifetime," Deanna said softly, her hand in Morgan's. That lonely woman living in this falling-down cabin, singing to herself just to hear a human voice. I barely recognized who I was then. "You were surviving," Morgan said. "You were doing what you had to do with the strength you had. That woman was remarkable, Deanna. She still is." Deanna turned to him, reaching up to touch his face. Her fingers traced the lines that time had etched there, the creases around his eyes, the silver in his beard. "You have given me such a beautiful life, Morgan. Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real, that I get to wake up every morning beside you, that we built a family and a home together. If I could go back and tell that frightened young woman singing in this clearing what was coming, I wonder if she would believe me." "She would hope it was true," Morgan said, capturing her hand and kissing her palm. "Just like I hoped that first day that maybe you would let me stay, that maybe you would see past the rough cowboy to the man who was already falling in love with you." They left the hillside as the sun began to set, riding down together on Morgan's horse, Diana secure in his arms just as she had been so many times over the years. Back at the ranch, their children and grandchildren were gathering for the anniversary celebration. There would be food and music and laughter, stories told and memories shared. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, the cowboy and the blind woman who had found each other against all odds. Morgan described the sunset to Deanna as they rode, painting the sky for her in words as he had done thousands of times before. But this time, he added something new. "You know, Deanna, I used to think I was doing you a favor being your eyes. But over the years, I have realized that you have been my eyes just as much as I have been yours. You have shown me how to see what really matters. You have taught me to notice the small things, the important things, the things that make life worth living. You have given me vision in ways that have nothing to do with sight." Deanna was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "We have been each other's eyes, Morgan. We have shown each other the world, each in our own way. That is what love is supposed to do, I think. It is supposed to help you see more clearly, not less. It is supposed to expand your world, not shrink it." "Then I guess we did it right," Morgan said with a smile. "I guess we did," Deanna agreed. As they approached the ranch, they could hear the sounds of celebration already beginning. Children's laughter, the tuning of a fiddle, the rich smell of roasting meat. Morgan helped Deanna down from the horse, and together they walked toward their home, toward their family, toward the life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. Years later, when Morgan was 68 and Diana was 64, they sat together on that same porch where they had watched countless sunsets and raised 4 children. Their grandchildren were grown now, some with children of their own. The ranch had been passed to Daniel, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Morgan and Deanna had moved into a smaller house near the main ranch house, a comfortable place with everything on one level that made life easier as they aged. Morgan's eyesight had begun to fail. It had started gradually, a blurriness that he had dismissed at first, but over the past year it had worsened until he could barely make out shapes and shadows. The irony was not lost on either of them. The man who had spent decades being someone else's eyes was now going blind himself. "I am afraid," Morgan admitted one evening as they sat together. It was one of the first times Deanna had heard him say those words. "I do not know how to do this, Deanna. I do not know how to live in darkness." Deanna reached for his hand, and her grip was strong and sure. "Then let me be your eyes," she said softly. "Let me teach you what you taught me all those years ago, how to navigate by sound and touch, how to find beauty in things you cannot see, how to build a life that is full and rich even without sight. Morgan, you have been my partner for over 3 decades. Now let me return the gift you gave me." And so their roles reversed, or perhaps simply became more equal. Deanna described sunsets to Morgan now, painting the sky with her words the way he once had for her. She taught him to move through their home by memory and touch, to identify his grandchildren by their voices and footsteps. She showed him that blindness was not the end of life, just a different way of experiencing it. They took walks together, Deanna guiding Morgan just as he had once guided her. She pointed out the feel of different plants, the sound of different birds, the scent of the seasons changing. Morgan learned to rely on his other senses, to trust Deanna completely, to accept help without shame. He learned the lessons she had tried to teach him so many years ago, about independence and interdependence, about strength and vulnerability. On a warm June evening in 1904, they sat together on their porch as the sun set over the California hills. Morgan's sight was almost entirely gone now, just vague impressions of light and dark. But Deanna described the sunset to him with the same detail and love that he had once used for her. "The sky is on fire tonight," she told him, her voice soft and warm. "I remember you describing sunsets like this, all gold and pink and orange. The clouds are stretched thin across the horizon, glowing with color. Our grandchildren are playing in the yard, and their laughter sounds like pure joy. Daniel and his wife are standing together near the barn watching the children. Everything is peaceful, everything is beautiful." "How do you know?" Morgan asked with a smile. "You cannot see it any more than I can." "I know because I can hear it," Deanna said. "I can hear the contentment in Daniel's voice when he talks to his wife. I can hear the joy in the children's laughter. I can feel the warmth of the sun on my face and the cool evening breeze. I can smell the roses blooming near the house and the hay in the barn. I know because this is our home, Morgan, and I know every inch of it by heart, just like I know every inch of you." Morgan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "We have had a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Deanna confirmed. 50 years ago, I was a frightened woman living alone in the hills, convinced I would die there in isolation. And then you found me. You offered to be my eyes, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me love, partnership, family, purpose. You gave me everything, Morgan." "You gave me everything too," Morgan said, his voice rough with emotion. "You taught me what it means to really see, to really live. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. You taught me that love is not about fixing each other, but about walking beside each other through whatever comes. They sat in comfortable silence as the sunset faded and the stars began to appear. Neither of them could see the stars anymore, but they knew they were there, constant and eternal, just like their love. The children's voices faded as they were called inside for supper. The ranch settled into its evening quiet, the peaceful end to another day. Diana. Yes, love. If I could go back to that day when I found you singing on the hillside, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, every sorrow, it all led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Deanna leaned her head on his shoulder and Morgan put his arm around her, holding her close. Neither would I, Morgan. Not a single thing. You found me blind and alone, and you gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You have been my eyes, my heart, my everything. And you have been mine, Morgan said softly. They sat together on the porch as night fell completely. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built a love that transcended sight, that survived every challenge, that grew deeper with every passing year. Morgan Crawford had offered to be Diana Bailey's eyes, but in the end, they had become each other's vision, each other's world, each other's home. The ranch continued around them, the land they had worked and loved and passed on to their children. Their grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of how Grandma Deanna and Grandpa Morgan had met, how he had found her living alone in the hills and had offered to be her eyes, how they had fallen in love and built a life together. The story would be told to great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, becoming part of the family's history, a testament to the power of love and determination and partnership. But for now, in this moment, it was just Morgan and Deanna, sitting together in the darkness that had become their shared reality, holding hands and listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. They had been each other's eyes, each other's strength, each other's constant companion through every season of life. And that, they both knew, was the greatest gift of all. The stars turned overhead, invisible to them but there nonetheless, bearing witness to a love story that had begun with a simple offer, "Let me be your eyes," and had blossomed into something that transcended sight itself. In the end, Morgan and Diana had learned that the most important things in life were never seen with eyes anyway. They were felt with the heart, experienced with the soul, and built with two people willing to walk through life hand in hand, come what may. Their story became legend in the valley. The blind woman and the cowboy who had loved her, the partners who had built an empire together, raised a family, and created a legacy that would endure for generations. But to Morgan and Deanna, it was simply their life, the beautiful, complicated, joyful, sometimes heartbreaking journey they had traveled together, and they would not have traded a single step of it for anything in the world. As the years rolled on, Morgan and Deanna lived out their days in peace and contentment, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had loved. When Morgan passed away at the age of 73, Deanna held his hand and whispered words of love until his last breath left his body. She could not see his face, but she did not need to. She knew every line, every contour, every expression by heart. Diana lived for 3 more years, cared for by her children and grandchildren who had learned from her example what strength and grace looked like. She tended her garden until the very end, her hands sure and steady in the soil. She told stories about Morgan to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive with her words just as he had once painted the world for her with his. When Deanna's time came, she went peacefully in her sleep with a smile on her face, and those who found her swore she looked like a young woman again, as though death had stripped away the years and revealed the brave, beautiful girl who had once lived alone in the hills, singing to keep the darkness at bay. They buried Deanna next to Morgan in the small cemetery that overlooked the ranch, under a simple stone that bore both their names and the dates that had bracketed their lives. But their true memorial was the family they had created, the land they had cultivated, and the love story that would be told and retold for generations to come. It was a story of finding light in darkness, of partnership and respect, of two people who had made each other whole not by fixing what was broken, but by loving each other exactly as they were. And sometimes, on warm evenings when the sun sets over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, you can almost hear the echo of a cowboy describing the beauty of the world to the woman he loved, and the sound of her laughter in response. Their love had transcended sight, transcended time itself, becoming something eternal and unchanging, a testament to what two people can build when they choose to see the best in each other and walk through life hand in hand, eyes or no eyes, sighted or blind, partners in everything until the very end and beyond.